in today's work? The short answer is I'm giving a talk and I'm giving a workshop and a discussion group around the topic of teaching and assessing for understanding, which is a lot of what my research has been at Project Zero over the last, well, long time, 25 years now. But really what I'm doing, I think, is supporting an amazing local effort to help teachers invest in and stay invested in their own learning. Right? I say there's no end run around teachers when it comes to supporting learning for students, right? So you can look and you can find lots of highly scripted curriculums people publish them, they get used in districts. And really the thought is if we can just script things enough, then teachers can't possibly make a mistake. Right? And it's just going to be exactly the way we want it to be, which completely misses the complexity of that human interaction around teaching and learning. And what we at Project Zero see going on here at Bigger Valley is an amazingly coherent and sustained effort to engage teachers in deep reflection on their own teaching practice for the purposes of learning. And you know, to find a school district that takes the learning of the adults in the system as seriously as it takes the learning of the students is a relatively rare find and just a complete pleasure, I think, because there is no shortcut around teacher learning. So really, that's what I see myself doing here today is engaging with teachers who are already in a deep learning process and trying to figure out how I can support them. Does that sound reasonable?
Kind of our vision is around developing a culture of thinking, but it's embedded, it's rooted in this thriving community of learners. And we rolled this vision out after a year-long process of formulating it with community involvement. The board embraced and embedded in policy that vision. And then in interpreting that to the faculty on opening day, we talked about the notion that everyone is a learner. And that sounds a little, you know, lifelong learning and everything, but it's true. And we've never had this long-standing and coherent process of professional development. We call it generally, but it's really, we're immersed as learners all the time from each other. And it's not just, these are really exciting days when we get Tina Blythe to come, but in between those visits, we have Dr. Ivanko leading cohorts of teachers, and these teachers have risen up, and you see some of their names on the program. They're teaching each other, and so it's this ongoing process of continuous learning, and it's happening very naturally, very organically throughout our schools, throughout every school day. So it's really, it's an exciting time, and the teachers are responding very favorably. And
you know, we're talking a lot today about the process of assessment, which is embedded in this whole idea of understanding, which asks the question, what's the most important thing that we want our students to understand? That's the important starting place. When we envision them moving out into the world in 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, whenever that graduation point comes, what's going to best equip them to deal with a huge number of unknown factors? That process of teaching for the unknown, teaching in a way that students can actually use what they know flexibly in a new context that they've never seen before, is what we call the process of teaching for understanding. So in Project Zero's research, we've kind of taken a very particular definition of understanding. So it's not enough just to know things. You really have to have flexibility and the capacity to meet a novel question probably you haven't seen before, and know how to marshal everything that you've been taught in the service of that. You know, teaching for the unknown is not usually what we tend to think of, especially when you look at curriculum, right? It's teaching the known, right? These are well-established fields, these are formula, this sort of thing. So that extra push to take all of that, you know, those curriculum frameworks and the textbooks and the whatever those repositories of stuff, and try to think, what's going to make that actually relevant in 20 years when students are out there in the world. It can't just be we're going to update the content every time, because honestly, the kids can find any question you can ask that has an answer to it can be found faster on Google than we can find it in the classroom. So what's the value added here? What is it that you can't learn on Google? That's what we need to be. Well, I think what's maybe more interesting is to look at, is to ask the question about what's meaningful to students at particular points along the way. Dave Perkins, the colleague of mine that has been at Project Zero for years, one of the co-directors for a number of years, loves asking groups of people, how many people studied the quadratic equation when you were in school? Everybody raises their hand. Yeah, everybody raises their hand. How many people could explain it now? How many people actually use it now? A few people raise their hands and that sort of thing. Of those people who raise their hands, how many of you are teachers of math who teach that? Almost all those people raise their hands again, right? So there's this interesting puzzle about what, and for everybody else, that was a blip in their educational timeline. We would argue that, first of all, the decision about what to teach may be the most important decision that a school district, a teacher, whatever can make, right? So how we spend our time in the classroom when time is precious and time is short, and there's a whole lot to cover. Ask the question, what do we think actually matters? What do we think is generative to the student and to the teacher and to the discipline and subject that they're studying, and can be made accessible to groups? So within that little bundle of criteria, we can find some best bets, right? Some of them are not best bets, and some of the things that standardly turn up in the curriculum are not actually best bets for gaining a kind of, having a meaningful learning experience in that process. So that's just to frame what are we teaching. And the question about how, maybe I can play out an example we were just playing out up there. So, and you're positing, let's give them some information first, and then they can start to think and understand the why. Sometimes you don't learn the information unless you understand the why and why this matters. A lot of Project Zero's research grows directly out of a kind of social constructivist framework, the idea that we actually have to, first of all, build our own understandings of ideas. You can't just tell me. I'll memorize it if you tell me, and I'll spit it back at the appropriate moment on the test. But that doesn't mean that I know anything about how this connects to other things I might know, other things outside of school, things that might matter in the future. One of my favorite, sad but favorite examples of this was a school district that I was in, actually not doing teaching for understanding work. I was there for another reason. But I knew that the 8th grade teachers, there's an 8th grade standardized test given every year, writing involved, and the teachers really wanted students to do well on this test. So they taught the 5-paragraph essay, right? Standard form, introduction, 3 examples that explain why you've argued your thesis, and then a closing statement which recapitulates but does not exactly restate where you were looking at. And they were pretty convinced after working with kids on this for a number of months that they got it. And they could write 5-paragraph essays, they could read that the test scores come back, they take the test, they write this essay on the test scores come back. The kids do pretty badly across the 8th grade. And I was with the teachers as they were talking about this in the faculty room one day, and I said, well, you know, go back and ask the kids, you know, talk to them about what went on, that somehow that didn't, what they knew didn't transfer to the test situation. What's going on there? So the teachers went and asked the kids and said, so, you know, we've got these scores. They do not reflect what we think you're actually capable of here. And we're just curious about what's going on here. Like, why didn't you write a 5-paragraph essay? Like, you know. And they said it was like lightning going off around the room. The kids were going, oh, that's what we were supposed to do, right? The test didn't say write a 5-paragraph essay. The test said make an argument for why, you know, there should be a curfew or whatever it was at the time, why we should have it. So
had phenomenal teachers and phenomenal students who do quite well. What we realize is under No Child Left Behind, there was a different way of teaching and learning, and we have accepted, and it's kind of like we've unleashed our teachers who remember a different time, survived this period, and now are coming through to the other side, and then some who've never known anything but. And we all need to be learning all of the time. Think about going in for surgery. The physician who hasn't been in school since medical school 30 years ago. That would be horrifying to me. And so we have to hold our teachers in that same regard and make sure that we're investing in their own learning. And so I wouldn't say that this has been a huge shift, or there's like the dark ages of before Project Zero and now we're enlightened, but boy, are we on a journey of discovery, of best practices, and we should have been all along. But we are, and the folks at Project Zero themselves would say, we're not the be-all, end-all. These are this is a body of research that we want to see applied to teaching and learning, and we love to hear feedback. And by the way, when we find other really interesting ways of thinking about teaching and learning that apply to your practice, go there too. So we have partnerships with the Children's Museum and Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh and Robert Morris University around maker spaces and things like that. It's what this has done for us is it has been a catalyst for opening our eyes and branching out and making new partnerships and bringing all of these ideas back into our practice so that our children benefit. So it's our own learning that we are loving, but it's with kids as our focus, and they're who we serve. So it's, I don't want to suggest that there was this before and after, so to speak, even though there really is, but what I'm saying is that it's making us better at what we do. For some it's a huge shift, for others it's a little bit of a tweak. It's just like our children, we're all at a different place developmentally. And my task, my responsibility is to make sure everybody's growing. And we are. And I've never seen K-12 coherency around professional development that resonates with every practitioner. From our life skills special education teacher working with our very challenged children to our AP teachers at the high school who are wrestling with what about coverage of content? How does that play out? And we're all learning together, and we're challenging one another's thinking, and we're getting better at what we do, and we're starting to see the results, as some of you have mentioned, in our children by the conversations they're having and by the kind of thinkers that they are in response to real-world questions, as opposed to worksheets. You know, the task of a real-world problem, and then we're able to assess their learning because they're making it visible to us. And there's no better way, in my opinion, of understanding, kind of when you talk about wanting to understand and see their brains and their learning, is when they make it visible to us by sketching it out, by explaining it orally, by explaining it in writing. It causes them to go deeper, and it gives us a window into what they're learning. I'm a novice to this. This is 7 years later, and I'm still, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I need to learn. And that's a healthy thing. And I've never, it's sad to say, I've been at this over 30 years, and I've never been so excited and feel so much better at what I do as that which I've learned in these last 7 years. Which I can flip it around, and make that my first 7, and I go right back into that classroom and do a much better job. And this is one example, but it is the power of seeing the learning that happens when teachers provide these opportunities for kids to collaborate, make their own ideas visibly present, and then respond to the ideas of their classmates, and then build upon as others do. What we're seeing, a couple of things, it's very interesting, is that our brightest kids are being challenged in ways that they've never been challenged before, that forcing to write out, explain. And they're a little frustrated because they're real good at the whole test thing. They could raise their hands and get the answer first, and they could ace the tests, and they just want to do that because this is hard. It's really hard here. And that's the sweat we want to see. Our struggling kids, who oftentimes were beat out by the smartest, fastest hand with the right answer, have a voice, and they have phenomenal ideas too that could be overlooked in a classroom. Their ideas are being made visible and being validated by their classmates. And it's just really kind of exciting. My background's in special education, so I'm very comfortable working with struggling learners. And I've often had a heart for how hard it is for those kids to feel confident and successful in a regular classroom despite all the supports and services we provide for them. It is really pretty cool to see that a kid who you know has an IEP because of a significant learning disability has got this phenomenal idea that some of what you consider the brightest kids in the classroom are validating and building upon. When our kids leave us, they're going to work in places that have that kind of diversity of intellectual ability, that kind of diversity of thought. And we're not doing right by them if we don't give them those kinds of experiences, K-12, that equip them for that kind of interaction and idea sharing and problem solving. Tina, you said something this morning, I wrote it down, but I don't have my notes right handy, about ideas and problem solving. And the problems that, something about the problems kids are going to have to solve one day can't be solved by.
Yeah, they won't be solved by one person.
They're too complex.
Right.
Could we just pause before my relentless empiricist is not going to let...
Just one moment, if you would just repeat that, because
Sure.
it was so important. Yeah.
We were looking at, yeah, sure. We were looking at the range of, if we're imagining the future, what are some of the big questions that this generation is going to inherit from us,
Yeah.
right, when they go forward. A lot of things we haven't, aging populations, getting fresh drinking water, dealing with income disparity. I mean, there's things all going on all over the world that are complex problems, and not one of them is going to get solved by a single person having a brilliant idea that just takes care of it all. It's always going to be a collaboration. It's always going to be reaching across fields, reaching across professions, and being able to listen to and work with each other. So, thinking about the kinds of things people share. It's interesting because I think, what would I say about assessment? Just important things, right? So here's a big difference between Project Zero's thinking about assessment and the way it plays out in a lot of schools. There's a lot of ways in which assessment at the teacher level, we strive for objectivity, which means we want things as standardized as possible. So, the short answer, multiple choice kinds of, because those are good because it's clear what the students have gotten right and wrong. Well, what's problematic about them is that they're not actually revealing the deep thinking and learning that's going on there. But then, how are we going to grade that when it's turning up on there, right? There's a puzzle. So one of the pieces of the work that Project Zero has been doing and that people are taking up here is this idea of collectively having teachers sit with pieces of student work together and have a structured conversation about that work, so that if you're going to say something's an A and you're going to say something's a C, we actually have an explicit conversation about why that is, and we start to develop a common language so that it's not we're trying to get around teacher judgment, we're trying to cultivate teacher judgment so that they can engage thoughtfully. The other thing that we do, though, is offer, there are ways of engaging with student work and giving feedback that actually do not involve evaluation, right? There are alternatives. When your kid walks in with a piece of paper that has, where they've drawn whatever, their project, they bring home their project, there are other ways of responding than to just say, that's so great, right? There's an evaluative statement. That's great, good work, you've been a good, you can just describe what you see. Oh, I see what you did here. You did this, this, and this, and see what happens. You can simply ask another question without that initial reaction. Oh, tell me about this. What did you think was going on here? And all of these pieces we actually see as part of the assessment process, because assessment isn't just about giving the grade. It's really about trying to understand the thinking and learning that's going on, so that we're not making huge assumptions about what we think was learned or not learned in this. We actually can get it out there and talk about it. I know that for myself as a parent, when we were doing this work at Project Zero, like unschooling myself, right? Taking from that instant, oh, that's so great. This is beautiful, honey. Right? Just learning to dial that back a little bit in order to ask more questions, in order to observe carefully what was there, to take it seriously, right? It's worthy of it was worthy of your time, it's worthy of my time to engage it. So that was work I found really challenging, not just on the teacher front, but on the parent front as well.